Charles and I had a child. But he's a boy. So why would I be pregnant? We haven't seen each other at all in the 5 years since we broke up. Charles was pregnant. With red eyes from crying. Jenny. You were drunk that night. I couldn't break free. Or did I force you? Jenny. Open the door. If you can get my son pregnant. Why can't you open the door? If you don't open the door. My son will be born right outside your hallway. I have a hangover from last night. And my head hurts like hell. Aunt Wong. Why are you here? Her face was the color of a pig's liver. Why do you think I'm here? Before. We lived in the suburbs. Auntie Wong was our neighbor. After we moved to the city. She would occasionally drop by with vegetables she grew herself. I looked at her hands. She wasn't carrying any vegetables. You tell me. What do we do now? Do we go straight to the civil affairs office to get married? Or should we go back to the village to hold the banquet first? Auntie Wong's words left me confused. What marriage? Auntie Wong. My father hasn't found a partner recently. My father has been busy looking for a marriage partner recently. A tall boy walked out. His white, slender fingers caressed the slightly protruding belly. Who are you? The boy looked up. His pair of passionate, peach-colored eyes were tearful. Now I recognized him. Charles. A flash of panic crossed his eyes. Then he looked at me helplessly with those wet eyes. My gaze dropped. Why did your belly get so fat? You should lose weight. A film of moisture appeared in his eyes. I'm not fat. I'm pregnant. I pursed my lips. And farted. You're a man. How can a man get pregnant? Auntie Wong slammed the hospital report in my face. Have a good look. I can't really read it. But the name is indeed Charles. There's something. A one-off case in the whole country. Gender reversal syndrome, something like that. At the end were the test results. The baby was already 6 months old. I looked up in disbelief at the 186-meter-tall Charles. I'm fucking pregnant. It was like a bolt from the blue. I was wide awake all of a sudden. Only then did I realize that there were people all around me. The neighbors were all poking their heads out to watch the fun. What made me even more chilled to the bone was that my Charles was a big, strong man. He was 23 and had never been in a relationship. And you got him pregnant. He was going to do his PhD. And have a child out of wedlock. How will he hold his head up in the future? I took a step back. Auntie Wong. You're not joking. Not to mention that I'm a woman. In these past 5 years. I haven't seen Charles. At all. How could this child be mine? It's not that I'm trying to avoid responsibility. But after moving to the university dorms. I haven't seen Charles at all. Let alone slept with him. And got him pregnant. The neighbors are buzzing with talk. About the girl getting pregnant. We feel she's not self-respecting. Now the guy's pregnant. What's this? The guy's not going to fake a pregnancy to blackmail you. Is he? A man pregnant? What kind of incest is this? Charles walked up to me with a pregnant belly. And knelt down. He's now a 6-month pregnant man. A pregnant man. Can't kneel. I was about to help him up. But I heard him sob faintly. Jenny. You were drunk that night. I couldn't push you away. Goosebumps all over my body. Charles. Don't try to pass the buck. When did I ever? The man on the ground. Is pitiful. Biting his lip. Looking at me. 6 months ago. At the class reunion. It was like I'd fallen into an ice river. And my whole body went numb. That's right. The night of the class reunion. I got drunk. And when I woke up again. There was blood on the sheets. I messed around with a guy. But I don't know who that guy was. And no one came looking for me afterwards. I thought it was a one-night stand. But I never imagined that it was Charles, who had liked to pester me since we were kids. I swallowed hard and quickly helped him up. But Aunt Wong slapped my hand away and protected her son behind her, with the attitude of a hen protecting her chicks. Jenny, where's your father? Call your father out. If you're irresponsible, I'll jump off this building. My father went out hunting for rich women last night. How would I know where he is? In order to keep things from blowing up, I coaxed and lied to get the two of them into the house. On the sofa. Charles had red, puffy eyes and looked at me carefully. Our eyes met. Then shyly lowered his head and stroked his protruding belly. He's 23. He's graduated from graduate school. But why does he have the face of an innocent college student? No, if he hadn't skipped grades. Then yes. He is now a college boy. Auntie Wang. Don't worry. If the child is actually mine, I will definitely take responsibility to the end. A woman like an eagle should shoulder her responsibilities. When Charles heard these words from me, he looked at me with even more tender eyes. Auntie Wang implored. Then you can't go out and fool around anymore. You have to sever your ties with those men out there. That's for sure. My promiscuity. My father and Auntie Wang both know about it. There's no way. Ever since the family won 300 million. I feel like there's only men and food in the world. Having 66 male models in one night is my habit. So these days, I'll leave Charles in your hands. That's Auntie Wang. You. Auntie Wang frowned. Why? Do you dislike my Charles? Don't want to take responsibility? I quickly shook my head. No. I'm afraid I'm inexperienced. And take care of him. Auntie Wang's face brightened up a lot. She took my hand and said seriously. Jenny. I have watched you grow up. When you were little, you were very good at taking care of Charles. Auntie Wang was at ease. You don't even know. Auntie Wang's eyes turned red. When the pregnancy was detected, Charles actually wanted to give birth to the baby on his own. He is so sensible. How can I, as a mother, let my child suffer like this? Don't blame Auntie Wang. I really had no choice. Having a man get pregnant put a lot of pressure on Charles. I just want him. Could settle down and have a family. After Auntie Wang left, the living room of the huge villa was just me and the pregnant Charles. I sat carefully next to him. But he moved away as if he was scared. My bottom swayed a little. I moved closer. He moved away again. I was furious. I stood up and yelled at him. Charles. What do you mean by avoiding me? It seemed that he was shocked by my words. Suddenly, he covered his stomach. His face turned pale. Fine sweat quickly seeped from his forehead. I panicked. I reached for my phone to call. Yes. The baby is kicking me. It's kicking. A wonderful feeling spread through me. I wiped the sweat from his forehead with a tissue. Feeling guilty. Sorry. I shouldn't have yelled at you just now. Does it still hurt? Charles gave a faint smile. And shook his head. I stared at the thin layer of fabric. And realized that, underneath, in his belly, there was a little life. He would be born in 3 or 4 months. Can I touch it? He guided my hand to his belly. Suddenly, a small bump touched the palm of my hand. And tickled. My eyes widened. I touched it. Charles smiled. And nodded. It was an indescribable feeling. But I was so happy that I almost jumped up. I wanted to take a closer look at his belly. Soy prepared to lift up his shirt. Charles pressed my hand. I was puzzled. Just take a look. No said firmly. This made a strange feeling rise in my heart. Why won't you let me see? Charles realized that he had overreacted just now. And softened his tone. Begging. Jenny. Not to look. Okay. I began to question. Charles. Are you? Not even pregnant at all. His pupils suddenly constricted. You. Think I'm lying to you? Charles's eyes gradually turned red. As if he didn't want to see me. And stood up. He seemed to want to leave. Then just pretend that I'm lying to you. The voice was full of grievance and sadness. I stopped him. If you are really pregnant, why don't you show it to me? There is also air conditioning in the room. I won't catch cold. You said I'm the baby's mother. Don't I have the right to take a look at him? Under my aggressive tone, Charles lifted his shirt with a bitter smile. His belly button was covered with sparse, brownish red stretch marks. They weren't very obvious. But they were ugly enough. Charles's fingers were shaking as he held his shirt together. Have you had enough? I was flustered. Stunned. I mumbled. His nose was red. Tears pattering down. Charles. His body trembled slightly. His voice was tinged with fear. Don't you come any closer. His movement of stepping back made my guilt reach a level I had never experienced before. After a long while, I spoke. I'm sorry, Charles. His expression eased. His tone was difficult. Jenny. Are these ugly? Do you find them disgusting? His tone was excessively humble. And my heart immediately ached. No, not at all. I tightened Charles's hand. Don't worry. We'll go back to the village in a few days to have a banquet. And go to the country you want to get married in. Do you want to get married this month or next month? It's fine. Or you can ask Aunt Wong. No, ask Mom to bring the household register over now. We'll go get married this afternoon. Suddenly, the door was kicked open. The person who came was tall and slender. Broad shoulders and narrow waist. His handsome face was dark. Jenny. Say it again. Who are you going to get married to? And why is Edward, the guy I've been mooning over for months, here? A few months ago, it was all the rage in Beijing to go after Edward. And I jumped on the bandwagon. Even though I gave him the keys to my place. But Edward's attitude towards me remains unclear. I thought I'd give it a few more months. And if it doesn't work out, that's it. I never thought he'd actually come to my place today. As if he were in his own home. Edward sat down opposite Charles with aplomb. And there was a strange smell of gunpowder in the air. Charles looked at Edward with a sharp gaze. But the next second, he looked hurt. Hurt. I quickly crouched down. What's wrong? Charles glanced at Edward next to him. It's nothing. Just that the baby kicked me again just now. I was relieved. It's good that it's nothing. Edward crossed his long legs. Mature and steady. Jenny. Explain. After all, you have shown your love. You really should explain. After listening to Edward's calm eyes. Jenny. Do you have a brain? I exploded. Hey. You've gone too far. Even if you are Edward. You can't get me and then insult my intelligence. Charles patted me affectionately on the back. Jenny. Don't be angry. Edward may have his own ideas. Go get Edward something to eat. I'll talk to him. After all, it is Edward. We can't be too harsh. I walked out of the pig riding stance. And went to the kitchen. As soon as I left, Charles gave Edward a provocative smile. I grew up with Jenny since childhood. And our relationship is better than yours. Edward didn't care. I can give her a better life. Charles rubbed his belly. I'm pregnant with her child. How can you compare with me? I glanced at Charles's belly with eyes as cold as a pool of water. Don't look. It's true. There's only one case like this in the country. Edward sneered. Using a child to tie her down. Don't you think it's ridiculous? Charles narrowed his peach eyes. Have the guts to impregnate one yourself. Edward stopped smiling. I guess it's just not in his nature to smile. Then, the other person lightly raised the corners of his mouth. Jenny. Must hate being cheated on. Right. Besides, it's still a child. Which is so important to a woman. Charles looked him in the eye without blinking. Edward got up. His lips pursed in a dignified and indifferent manner. Finding evidence is just a matter of time for me. I advise you to get out of here. I came out of the kitchen with a tray of fruit. And just in time, saw Edward's back disappear in the doorway. Charles sat on the sofa in a daze. He's bullying you. Charles's lips curved up in a smile. And he shook his head. As I walked over and put down the fruit. He leaned against me. Jenny. Well. I love you. Really. This sudden confession made me a little unprepared. He paused for a moment. And continued. Jenny. Do you remember when we were in junior high school? And you saved me that time. Why don't you remember? Charles had delicate skin and looked tender since he was young. He was even better looking than the average girl. There were even more boys than girls who sent him love letters. In the second semester of the second year, Charles was cornered by a group of boys in an isolated alley. When I rushed over, the boys were actually taking off his pants. With a pocket knife in hand, I ran out with Charles. After that, at his request and enticement, I became his bodyguard for a year. Jenny. Ever since you rescued me from them. I vowed. I would be with you forever. When I looked at Charles's delicate face, my heart pounded. This is unnecessary. I was just doing it for the weekly dollar. That's not true. Charles excitedly took my hand and slowly moved closer, too. Jenny. After I parted with you, I've done nothing but study and bury myself in research. I have nothing. Many people have confessed their love to me. But I am not interested. I don't want to enter into an emotional relationship with anyone anymore. Except you. As he spoke, he burst into tears. Redness spread across his fair face. His almond-shaped eyes were filled with tears. Charles clasped my hand and bit by bit kissed my lips. The faint fragrance of sandalwood was intoxicating. So Jenny, don't let go of me. As he pressed me into the corner of the sofa, Charles's eyes burned with a fiery passion. As he kissed me again and again, gently and lingeringly, as if waiting for my response, as if he were declaring his love for me, cautiously but full of expectation. I don't remember the night he impregnated me clearly. Was it like this? Wanting to demand more from each other. Charles changed position. I panted as I looked down at him. His large hands clasped the back of my head, begging me. Jenny. This time. Don't be so fierce. Okay. I've never been gentle. I guess I was a bit too hard last time. Okay. This time. I'll go easy. My earlobes were wrapped in a hot, wet embrace. I suddenly came to my senses. No, I can't. Charles's peach blossom eyes were full of obstinacy, pinning me down as I tried to escape. What's wrong? My eyes fell on his belly. Charles endured and undid the last layer of my clothes. Our skin touched. He whispered to me. 6 months is very stable. Jenny. Don't be afraid. I was awake. Gradually. Charles pulled me into the purple beauty again and again. Half asleep. I suddenly remembered a little of that night. It was Charles who took me to the hotel. He was probably wiping my face. I was aroused and kissed him of my own accord, and dragged him to the bed. After a few struggles, he finally let me do whatever I wanted. I thought. It was someone who looked like Charles. In the middle of the night, I received a message from Edward. Data. Photos. Videos. All of them were proving to me that Charles could not have gotten pregnant. Even if he did, the baby would not have survived. Looking at Charles's peaceful sleeping face in my arms, my mind was pulled. His slightly protruding belly is the child of mine and his. It rises and falls with his breathing. How could it be? Charles might just be the exception. So vicious. So vicious. How could you curse them like that? I ran outside. I sent Edward a voice message wishing his parents well. Then I deleted his contact information. After all that, a cool breeze suddenly blew onto the balcony. I gazed out at the darkening trees. I felt much clearer. Suddenly. Charles. Suddenly. A child. I have suddenly found happiness. This quiet and peaceful happiness is different from getting rich overnight. My mother went away after giving birth to me. Having a complete family is my greatest wish in life. Charles and that child are like compensation from the heavens. They will be fine. They will. When I returned to the house, I found that Charles's phone had a WeChat call. Hello. It seems that the other party has discovered something wrong. The next second, the call was hung up. This person's WeChat profile picture is a girl. Strange. Charles is an only child. This person is who? Early the next morning, I received a harassing call from Edward. Jenny. My patience is running out. Are you going to keep being stupid? I blew up again. I hate it when people try to be smart with me. Before long, there was a loud knock on the door. Edward. You can't threaten me over the phone. You're going to come over here and mess with me. Aren't you? I grabbed a kitchen knife and opened the door. Gene and his new girlfriend, Auntie, were dumbfounded. Gene whispered to me. I met her at a party. She's worth 600 million. I hid the knife behind my back. I hoped she hadn't seen it. Auntie. You're welcome to come over. When are you going to marry my father? After all, There isn't much left from the lottery win in our family. We still have to pay back various investment losses. After some explanation, the aunt finally gave up the idea that I was a crazy woman. Hey, why don't you guys light any incense at home? Lao Jean gave me a sign. To light some. It's just that I happened to run out of incense at home. As soon as I came in, this woman scrutinized every corner of my home and said that the wallpaper had no taste, and that the home had no style, and said I didn't know how to dress up. Like a little country dog. In the kitchen, I picked up the kitchen knife with a blank expression and wanted to kill it quickly. Lao Jean shook his head and educated me. Those who achieve great things do not pay attention to trifles. There was a loud crack in the living room. Go away. Stay away from me. It's dirty. When I went out to look, the glass was broken all over the floor, and the grapes were scattered. Charles was crouching down to pick them up. Don't pick them up. When I took his hand, I realized that his pale fingers were cut and bleeding from several places. Charles lifted his moist eyes and said, "Yes. I'm sorry, Jenny. I've caused you trouble." Before I could comfort him, I heard the aunt arguing with my father. "Robert, is your daughter crazy? She wants to marry this man." Lao Jean laughed and said, "Oh dear. They already have a child. They must be born to be a vixen. They must have been possessed. It's a monster that's neither man nor woman. It's too unlucky. Hurry up and tell your daughter to break up with him. I'll invite a master to come and perform rituals at the places he's been." My father gave us a look that was a bit difficult to read. Oops. This is all about the kids. Werich woman glared at him and poked my father's head a few times with an air of superiority. "What do you know? This kind of person is the most unlucky. If your daughter insists on staying with him, let's not get married. This rich woman is the most valuable person my father has met in all these years." It was finally time to get married. Charles, who was usually so quiet, suddenly spoke up. "But there are also many advantages to men having children. The wife doesn't have to endure the pain of carrying a child for 10 months. Those same sex." The rich woman looked disgusted and interrupted him. "Don't talk to me. I'm sick just hearing your voice. Lu Fugue. Let me ask you one thing. Between me and this jinx, who do you choose?" My father jumped up and spun around and threw the rich woman's bag into her arms. "I'll go fuck you. How many years has the reform and opening up been going on?" "I don't know. Did you just crawl out of the ground? Have the maggots eaten your brain? What's wrong with a man getting pregnant? What's wrong with being the same sex? The law doesn't clearly stipulate that. So it's fucking legal." The rich woman's eyes widened. You actually dare to speak to me like that? Don't you forget how you shamelessly proposed to me the other day? If it weren't for the fact that you look decent, and your family is in such a sorry state, I feel dirty just walking in." My father was also rude. "My temper is determined by others. I will treat you according to your type. TSK. It's fine to be old. But why must you be evil and cause trouble for me?" The rich woman was so angry that she couldn't say a complete sentence. And she left with a curse. "You will suffer retribution." Then she left cursing. My father was panting for breath and said he would rely on himself and never find a rich woman again. Charles was comforting him in the living room. As I emptied the broken glass into the kitchen bin, I noticed that Charles's phone in the kitchen had no lock screen. The phone call last night. Curiosity is the most tempting. Almost subconsciously, I found the WeChat contact. They had a chat this morning. But it was basically some research discussion. It seems that I have overthought it. But suddenly a few words made me freeze. Because those conversations were not fluent. It was obvious that some chat logs had been deleted. In the living room, I could hear my father and Charles laughing. I quickly exited the program and put the phone away. I was already covered in cold sweat. If those messages were normal, why would Charles delete them? Hadn't want me to see them. What were the deleted messages? And what? I suddenly felt that Charles, who had always been gentle and considerate in front of me, was a bit strange. Summer turned to winter. Charles's belly grew bigger and bigger. He gained weight overall. His angular face softened a lot. When I took him back to the city at night, in the middle of nowhere, a sports car blocked my path. The window rolled down, revealing a perfect profile. Edward from the Beijing Circle supported the steering wheel with one hand and looked at Charles contemptuously. He really has a pregnant face. Jenny, are you still going to sulk with me? Come here. Edward's figure management is still top-notch. Charles bit his lip and looked at me. Jenny, wait until I give birth. I'll go to the gym and work out after I give birth. I sneered. Can you go back to your old self after giving birth? I unbuckled my seatbelt and opened the door to get out of the car, in a tone that was devoid of emotion. Charles, I'll be honest with you. I've long since grown tired of it. Even if you were good-looking, overall, I'd still be annoyed. Don't get worked up. After I'm done having fun, I'll bring you back. Charles sat in the car, unbelieving. Jenny, what's wrong with you? Didn't you say? I interrupted him. Take a good look at yourself. How can you compare to Edward? All you do is cry. There's not a shred of masculinity in you. Not divorcing you is the greatest tolerance I've shown you. I stroked his hair, with a frivolous expression on my face, and told him to wait here for me. His eyes reddened as he reached out to me in supplication. Jenny, don't go. I was getting a little impatient. Charles, don't make me hate you. The light in his eyes dimmed. And finally, he turned away from me and stopped looking at me. But I knew he was crying. The deserted mountain road was very quiet. No wonder it's Edward, with those long legs of his. He kicked open the passenger door with one swift kick, and I got in. Within minutes, the wheels were in motion. I finally got out of the passenger seat and threw the 10 balloons with my fingers into Edward's face. My hands smelled of oil. I stuck my head back in and wiped them on the well-tailored suit. This was my first time. Thank you, Edward, for giving me the opportunity. When I got back in the car, Charles looked at my red fingers and patted them tenderly. My dear, did I hurt you? I shook my head. Helping someone with their hair is a bit tiring. After that, I drove off with Charles in the car. Inside the sports car, Edward stared incredulously at his sharp hairstyle in the rearview mirror. The cool, domineering hairstyle that was originally exclusive to the CEO had now become a six-cornered, strong young man with a strong scent. His eyes were bloodshot. Jenny. Over the past few months, Edward still refused to give up, using various methods. He tried to break up Charles and me. I really had no other way. I discussed it with Charles and tricked Edward into coming here. In fact, I wanted Edward to thoroughly dislike me. After all, no one should be able to stand having a few boxes of that stuff smeared all over their head. Right. Hey. I feel disgusted myself. I glanced over and saw Charles leaning back in his seat and smiling at me. I casually asked, Charles, are you hiding something from me? He was silent for a long time. Then he reached out and stroked my cheek with the warm pat of his finger. His voice was warm and low. Jenny, no matter what happens, you can trust me. I like you. Very much. I smiled in relief. Okay. I believed Charles. When the car drove into a suburban forest, something was wrong with the car. Charles's face became visibly paler. Jenny, the nearest hospital from here is 6 kilometers away. Charles, hold on. We'll be there soon. I was at a loss for words. I accelerated and drove directly at high beam. The surrounding trees all retreated. Charles and the baby must not be harmed. The display light flashes red. I turn off the engine. My heart pounds. I try to calm down. I slowly apply the brakes. Charles is breathing heavily. What's wrong? The car has stopped in a cemetery. I look at the time. It's already after 10 p.m. The hills are covered with tombstones. Charles's pain makes the veins on his neck stand out. Wait in the car. I'll be right back. The high beams illuminate this silent forest. I felt a surge of anger. It was late at night. I was in such a hurry. And he was playing with me like this. It was time for some discipline. I kicked the first tombstone. Get the hell over here. Meeting. What are you doing? What are you doing? You bunch of uncontrolled people. Do you know my husband is about to give birth? If you keep blocking me, I'll dig up all your fucking graves. I'll scatter your ashes. Believe it or not. I heard Charles whimpering from inside the car. I quickly ran up to the car. He was trembling. It sounded like the water had broken. His words really killed me. I almost burst into tears in front of him. But I knew, if I panicked at this moment, Charles would only worry more. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. We'll be there soon. For the first time, the car started again. Somewhere in the back, someone said, "Don't fall asleep. Here comes trouble. We're going to dig graves." Is she sick? Her car has a problem. She's scolding us. And crying. And pushing you. Let's go. Dear Father. Shut up. Just push. She's acting like she's sick. In ancient times, money could make ghosts push. Nowadays, people can make ghosts push cars. Charles. Charles. Hang in there. Until he was taken to the operating room. Our hands were not released. At the hospital, I was too afraid to scream. So I just crouched outside. And buried my head in my hands and cried. In fact, I was really scared to death. I was afraid that there was really something unclean. I was afraid that something happened to Charles in the car. And I couldn't do anything to help. I was afraid that something happened to our first child. I was afraid that I hit someone while driving. I was afraid that I was too late. Luckily, everything is fine. Jenny. Did Charles go in? In my tear-filled vision, I saw the figure of Lao Jean. The aunt next to him was Charles's mother. Auntie Wang. I nodded desperately. The door to the operating room suddenly opened. A group of doctors rushed in. I heard the nurse say, "The fetal heart rate is dropping." I froze. The alarm from the equipment inside rang in my ears. Something's wrong. I rushed to the operating room. The doctor stopped me. Family member. Calm down. We'll let you know if there's anything wrong. I just want to see if Charles is okay. Let me go in and see him. Let me see him. A nurse quickly came over. And said that just now it was only because the position of the fetus affected the fetal heart rate. And that everything was now normal. This is the first case of a man giving birth in the country. We will do our best to ensure the smooth operation. A sense of powerlessness swept over me. I nodded. Then I waited outside with the two elderly people. Charles must have been scared too. Did he feel any pain? After a while, the people inside brought some documents and consent forms for us to sign. I signed my name on the blank paper. Crookedly. Like a swarm of ants. Covered in blood. The doctors came out with a stack of papers. We did our best. The baby's head got stuck. When it came out, it wasn't breathing. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry for your loss. My head buzzed. My mind was filled with the happy expression Charles had when he was pregnant and talking about the baby. It was gone. How could it have suddenly disappeared? Charles had been so looking forward to the birth of that baby. He had even said he would teach him to write the character for person. He had already thought about where the child would go to kindergarten. How could it be gone? With tears in my eyes, I grabbed hold of the doctor. Where was Charles? Was he okay? He was fine. The adults were fine. That was good to hear. But there was a hole in my heart. It hurt. I leaned against the wall. And crouched down. And laughed twice. And then turned from laughing to crying. If Charles knew that the baby was gone, he would feel worse than I do. Charles was transferred to the ward. But after waking up, he refused to see anyone else. I walked in. Charles's face was pale. And he looked at me. Jenny. Hugged me. He couldn't hold back anymore. And cried until his whole body shook. I thought I was going to collapse on that operating table. I couldn't make any effort. The baby was born. But he didn't make a sound. They blocked it. I couldn't see it. I couldn't see it at all. Charles didn't even get to see the baby's face for the first time. My heart felt like it was being crushed in a vice. The pain made me tremble. Charles was standing on the roof of the hospital. He collapsed. He said, "Jenny. If only I weren't a boy. He would have survived." My throat felt like it was being squeezed. It was dry and tight. Blood was coming out of my throat. I felt like I was freezing from head to toe. Charles suddenly opened his eyes. Charles was lying next to me. He was still alive. The sour feeling from earlier came back. I hugged him tightly. I burst into tears. "Charles. Don't be sad. It's not your fault. We can still have a second child. A third child. Don't jump. Don't jump." Charles wrapped his arms around me. He rubbed my cheek. "Did you have a nightmare?" "Silly. We haven't even had our first child yet." "Not yet." Charles, who was still pregnant, snuggled under the covers. "So had just happened. Was a dream." The first rays of morning sunlight fell through the floor-to-ceiling windows and shone on Charles's smiling face. "He's fine. That's great." I nestled carefully in Charles's arms. He smelled so good. Like sandalwood. I was getting a little addicted. I breathed in the air around his neck greedily. He squeezed my waist. His voice was hoarse. "Jenny. Don't do that." I intensified my actions and kissed his neck bite by bite. What if you don't want to?" The sexy Adam's apple rolled up and down. Charles's voice was tinged with lust. I wouldn't be able to control myself. His long fingers held mine tightly. For a moment, it seemed as if our souls were mingling together. I was almost begging. Then, "Don't control yourself." His good-looking eyes lowered. Fine eyelashes covered them. The thin lips slowly approached. "Jenny. Open your mouth." The moment the little fuzz on his skin touched my lips, the speed of my heartbeat reached its peak. Charles kissed carefully. I was in a daze. He was clearly just a young neighbor I hadn't seen in years. Because of a one-night stand. He was carrying my child. And during the months I spent with him, it seemed I had completely fallen for him. The room was well lit. The originally spacious bed, for some reason, felt a bit cramped. The distance between Charles and I progressed gradually, with an unmistakable sense of intimacy. Such a beautiful breath rises into the air with each breath, fermenting and spreading. Charles covers his round belly and gasps on the bed, with tear-filled eyes as he looks at me. I lean in close to him and say seriously, "If you die in the delivery room, I will follow you there. You won't be lying there alone. You have me. I will be there with you." The pupils in his peach-colored eyes gradually widen, reflecting the look of my devotion. I kiss the corner of his mouth, almost crazily transforming my worries into madness. But in the next second after we part, I cry until I choke. "Charles. I love you." I love Charles. It was when he was in high school that the young genius always behaved gently and obediently in front of me, and was attentive and considerate. But I felt that I was not worthy of him. Until 5 years after I had not seen him, I once plucked up the courage to grab hold of someone who looked like him. Fortunately, that person was Charles. On the bus, people looked at Charles with different expressions. As soon as he got on, many people hesitated whether to stand up or not. The child's eyes were wide open. His pregnant brother. The child's mind had not yet been fixed. He allowed everything to happen. A young girl gave up her seat. "Come sit here. I'll get off soon." "Thank you. I'm taking my husband to the doctor for a checkup." There was an uproar around me. What the hell? A man is pregnant. How disgusting. Could it be that the internet celebrity is faking it to get views? He looks better than the woman. A Thai lady boy. I looked at Charles with some concern. He looked at me and signaled that he was fine. The gossip around me was as unpleasant as it could get. I sighed. "Why didn't you let me drive? You had to take the bus." He looked around. Everyone who had taken out their phones to take pictures stopped. Embarrassed, delighted, and panicked. Charles slowly stood up. His body was unsteady. He was about to give birth. It was easy to fall. "Be careful." What are you doing standing up? Charles looked at me quietly. And asked. Jenny. Do you know why they are looking at me like this? My heart was in turmoil. It is the gender prejudice in this society. Men should be masculine. And protect the family. Men shouldn't get pregnant. Charles turned his head. And spoke aloud in front of everyone. Gender prejudice is an attitude and behavior based on gender stereotypes and discrimination. No prejudice is innate. They grow up in the environment. If we can't change the environment, morality and law can never solve any problems by restricting individuals. The fresh green tree shadows outside the car window kept covering Charles. Indistinctly. At this moment, Charles exuded a rational and wise temperament. I have never seen such a Charles. Gender should not be marginal, it is the prejudice of society that is. Charles's performance art was a success. He got into the University of the Arts London. But I had an appointment with Edward in the bar to get drunk. The light and shadow were confused. Edward was sitting upright as if he were here to talk business, while I was hiccuping and making long, loud burps. Edward frowned. I thought you were just having fun with him. You're so deeply in love. I stumbled over to his ear. Baby. What? I slapped Edward. And cried out. Baby. I'm done with his baby. Edward covered his face and looked at me. I dared not say anything. And finally endured and cursed. I leaned on the booth. With my hands open and gesturing. So big his belly is actually fake. Oh. Unexpectedly Edward's expression eased a lot. And he picked me up in one hand. So you want a divorce with him? I froze for a moment. Leave. The baby is gone. Why stay together? His mouth curled up and he casually embraced me in his arms. Stay with me. I promise to get you pregnant. I looked at Edward's handsome face, which was pleasing to both gods and mortals. Gradually, that face turned into Charles's. He said, Jenny. I'm pregnant again. I didn't even touch him. Whose bastard is he carrying? That's not right. He definitely didn't get pregnant. I subconsciously put my hands around Edward's neck. You. Edward held the back of my head. And commanded in a low voice. Open your mouth. I'll open your mouth. I was in a daze. My head started to hurt. I was picked up by Edward. This guy is so strong. It hurts my thighs. I tugged at his tie. Edward. Can you please be a little gentler? The clear voice above my head was gloomy and frightening. Jenny. Don't you have a husband? Husband? I laughed. My index finger touched the man's lips. Saying. He's not my husband. He's just a liar. I can go to hell with my performance art. The world is happy. I'm the only one sad about a child that doesn't exist. When I go into the room, those big hands are going to strip me. I'm not such a casual woman. What are you doing? The voice above my head is obviously jealous. Why? I can't touch you now. I just ripped off my clothes. Showing a crazy man's smile. Not me. I mean you're too slow. I don't know what else I've done to offend him. He pressed me down hard, forcing me to look at him. Jenny. Look carefully. I'm not some prince from Beijing. I climbed onto his neck. And bit his head when he wasn't looking. His whole body stiffened. The sandalwood scent was so nice. Charles was breathing a little heavily from the kiss. Gasping for air. My infatuated appearance was reflected in his dark, mesmerizing eyes. Anew. His jade-like fingers undid his tie. He leaned down to kiss me with a sense of urgency. I wasn't idle either. Occasionally I touched my abs. Occasionally I undid a few buttons. His kisses became more and more frantic. With a sense of strength, possession, and punishment. Charles. Well. I want to have a child with you. His movement stopped for a moment. His large hand gently wiped the sweat from my forehead. His voice was hoarse as he said. I don't want you to be so tired. I don't want you to be alone in the operating room. I'm scared. The curtains in the room were blown up by the wind. The moonlight outside the window was bright. I laughed. Charles. Because of you. I won't be afraid anymore. I forgive Charles. What I fear more than that deception is losing someone I have loved for so long. Charles. You lied to me. His breath came in ragged gasps. Right next to my ear. Jenny. Forgive me. I suddenly feel like crying for no reason. Punishment. Listen to me tonight, so many words I once liked about you. The Charles on my body paused. Then a crazy storm broke out. Without me knowing. Charles silently watched me. This deception. He had planned for a long time. Without him knowing, I will bury my fondness and love for him deep in my heart. This deception. I have longed for a long time. Love should make people gentle and brave. Instead, it often makes people feel aggrieved or compromised.